NHL insider Frank Seravalli joins us from the Frankly Speaking podcast and the Daily Faceoff after a well-earned week away. Welcome back, Frank.
Thanks, guys. Good to be back with you. Just you can still kind of see the backwards hat tan that I had going, but it's slowly fading.
You get that? Oh, the half moon. I do see it.
When you're sitting at the swim up bar, you just got to make sure that your neck isn't getting crisped in the sun. So you just put the backwards hat on and slide it down a little bit.
There you go.
The secret. Only when you're having to catch with your kid in the pool for about 8 hours a day.
Right.
There's only so many. You got to buy a ton of virgin pina coladas, and then the rest you can kind of enjoy yourself.
How's the rotator cuff? From all the throwing?
It's sore. Yeah.
Daddy again.
So I traded speed bagging GMs and agents for info.
Yes.
And I traded that for having a catch.
Oh, there you go. That's
Tanning tips
good
with
trade.
Frank Seravalli coming up next week here.
Can't tone it, tan it.
Yeah.
Speaking of good trades, Nikita Zadorov's the belle of the ball these days for the Vancouver Canucks. He's not a perfect player. Mm-hmm. But when you look back at that trade for the Vancouver Canucks, do you think they're going to love it come playoff time? Because he certainly has upped it in the last couple of weeks anyway.
I do, and I think it really was the perfect blend of knowing that this was a guy that you're very unlikely to be able to afford, and to give up a third and a fifth. I mean, it's the right price, the right addition, the right stylistic ad, and you're perfectly comfortable at the end of that shaking hands and saying, good luck, sir. Cash in on the market. It's not going to be with us, but we were happy to use each other throughout this process.
Yes.
AFP Analytics projects he's going to be a $5.1 million player over 4 years. Does that sort of jive with what you're picking up?
100%. That was the asking price, I think. Not that they ever really got into negotiations in Calgary, but they knew that number was likely to start with a 5, which just made it so much easier to part ways with him. I think basically the Zadorov camp, not to put words in their mouth, but if I were looking at the market, I'd be thinking, hey, I'm a more mobile version of Eric Goodbranson that with the cap increasing, why shouldn't I be using that as the absolute bare minimum and floor and going from there?
I think we understand why the Canucks may not be able to afford him, but why do you say that? Why are you so certain that it's going to be a handshake after the end of the year? And good luck in your future.
Yeah, and is there any change in that? Like, what if it's a magical run in the playoffs?
Look, I would never say never. I would just say I think that was their thought process heading into it. It always can change. But I think more often than not, this is my own personal opinion now, is like team building philosophy and cap management. I think you tend to get in trouble with players at that pay scale for that term. It feels like if they were to go down that path, that it would be a reboot of the Tyler Myers deal that they hated for so long until they didn't.
And he's a
Does
flawed
that make
player.
any sense?
Yeah, and he's a flawed player. Like there are nights where he makes some really bad decisions. And generally the big players make loud mistakes too. I find, not like a Tyler Myers kind of thing. So he's a flawed player. So yeah,
he's a 4.
If you're going to bend over backwards for him, boy, he better be pretty reliable.
He's a number 4 defenseman in the NHL. And that's the truth. Someone will pay him. I would make the argument that if you're the Canucks and dollars, obviously you're at a premium and need to be doled out responsibly, I'm not paying my number 4 defenseman that kind of money.
And, if he could play the right side, if I loved him on the right side.
Well, if he's a right shot, I think I'd bend over backwards.
Different, but he's cameoed over there, but he hasn't been consistently played on that side.
They're already going to need to spend a lot on the right side.
Well, and that gets us to our next topic.
Segue. Look at that. Back from vacation. I never lost
it. So heard what you had to say on Canucks Conversation about Flip Hronek, and that any kind of talk that he's going to have to take less than Quinn Hughes is phooey.
Mm-hmm. I think the comparison I made was a Corvette and a Prius. These are not the two same things. And by that, I mean not comparing the style of players, but an RFA deal and an UFA deal are two totally different types of contracts in the NHL.
Right. And of course, Quinn Hughes was nowhere near unrestricted free agency. He was purely an RFA when the Canucks re-signed him to 7.85. Philip Hronek is 1 year away from unrestricted free agency, where he would be one of the rarest birds in UFA. You almost never get a young, right shot, two-way, all situations defenseman hit unrestricted free agency, in which case bonanza, right? What I'm interested in is you think he's a $7.5-8 million guy in arbitration?
Yeah.
This year, if it gets that, what are the comparables there, Frank? You know, what brings us to that number in arbitration?
Counting stats, 35 even strength points, 45 points overall, 24 minutes a night. I mean, then go back and size up the market and look at the deals that have been signed. I mean, he squarely fits right in that range. I mean, it's a no doubt, don't lose any sleep. This is what the arbitrator is coming back with. Here's the problem for the Canucks is they can't go down the arbitration path. It's not really all that different than Pettersson in the sense that, okay, you walk him to ARB, which walks him to UFA. You got to trade him before the season starts because you don't want to be going into the season saying, man, we really need to recoup assets for this guy who's such a huge part of our team. But we were trying to make the playoffs and win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
So there's a timeline to this, and it's really before a player can file for ARB. That's the deadline. That's the similarity with Pettersson. And I think to this point, to be fair, like I'm not presenting it as anything other than it's been totally status quo. Everything's on good terms. To my knowledge, I think the conversations have been preliminary, and the Canucks know they need to get to work on this file, but at least unless something changes, I don't think it's going to happen between now and the end of whenever the Canucks are playing.
Is there too many sunk costs here? I mean, is it a fait accompli that they have to sign this player, that they will not trade him for another player under contract, saying, okay, we just can't afford it in our cap situation? Or again, if they just spent so much that they don't want to deal with the PR disaster or anything else?
I don't think it's a fait accompli at all. I mean, I would say that different teams have different lines that they want to draw in the sand. If the Canucks want to stand on principle and say, this is our cap structure, Quinn Hughes is our best defenseman, and no one is making any more than him, well, that's fine. It's just that someone, like as mentioned with the ARB case, if that's the ARB this year, why would you take less than that to
going
then
forward,
sign an 8-year deal when the cap's going up? Like it makes no sense from the player's perspective. And so I think the other part of what you start to get into after that is the Canucks would be in a really tough spot trying to trade him, because then you have a guy that's already done all of the heavy lifting to get close to free agency. All he has to do is raise his hand and say, I'm not engaging in any negotiation with any team if you acquire me, and I am going to market. All that does is absolutely plummet the return that the Canucks could get. They're dealing probably in 50 cents on the dollar in what they were looking at in what they gave up, a first and a second. And more than that, I think there's real risk for the Canucks. And frankly, if we're being fair, there's risk for both parties here in that he's been such a great fit with Quinn Hughes and a no maintenance type player. It's a risk for them to then have to go out and find another right shot guy who clearly fits, but it's also some risk for him in that wherever he goes, he might get paid, he might make the money, but he might not find a fit where he's as important and valuable and productive somewhere else. So There's some mutual, I don't, what do they call it? The MAD theory, mutual assured destruction.
Yeah.
There's a healthy bit of that, I think, in general with this moving forward.
Yeah, but I do agree with Blake in that they're pot committed here because of what you cite, the partnership with Hughes. And if you're looking for one player who keyed the turnaround from terrible Canucks season last year to very good Canucks season this year, it's Philip Hronek.
That's the point I made yesterday with quads was,
it's
Miller's here,
unequivocally.
Pedersen's here, Hughes is here, Demko's here. I know the coaching change has been a huge part of it, and you could make the comments about the bottom six and the penalty kill and the other couple, defensemen that they brought in, and Cole and Soucy's been good, but the one thread to me to all of that, it has been, the Canucks had an engine. To me, Hronek has been the jet fuel to then have that take off.
Right. I mean, if you want to argue healthy Demko, yes, absolutely.
Sure.
But of course, what team without healthy goaltending is, able to play at this level? But the one addition to the group this year that has really made them go has been Hronek.
How about this, guys? I mean, I'll be the first to say, didn't love the JT Miller contract when it was signed. He's probably going to be a 100-point player this year, which means most likely,
again, by the way,
most likely, the next 2 years are probably very profitable seasons for JT Miller in terms of points per game. Maybe you've got a couple of seasons at the end of this contract that you wish weren't there, but at $8 million in 28, 29, who knows what the cap's at, but that could be pretty palatable. Could we make the argument for a guy that's younger, much younger in Philip Hronek, that if you pay him at 8 now, like how soon until you don't really care about that $8 million? Like is the cap going to be going up at such a rate here where $8 million's pretty doable for a number 2, number 3 guy in your team?
Just back of the napkin math, 28, 29, the cap should be somewhere between 120 and 125 million bucks.
Which, $8 million is nothing at that point.
Right. So I would say for right now, like, let's just say operate under the hypothetical that let's say this lands at 8 times 8 and it's a place where player is probably pretty satisfied. Team is probably grumbling a little bit. Fan base is probably grumbling a little bit. The next few years while you're in your competitive window, like to me, it's way better to have the known commodity that works versus having to go out and find it again.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
I think the longer it goes on for a guy that will, in a few years will still be sub 30, like I'm looking at it saying there's really no risk on the part of the Canucks. Like, let's say you get 3 years in or 4 years in and you want to change things up. That's not going to be a contract you're going to have an issue moving. I mean, look at just from a pure counting stats basis, going back to when he first got into the league. I said this when I first joined you guys and talked about Hronek, and I said that this contract would be a number that started with an 8, and everyone laughed at me. He's a 0.5 point per game defenseman, and he's a right shot guy. Like that's going to be the going rate, and I don't see that number falling off a cliff. Like his production isn't suddenly going to end, and you can make whatever comments you want about not driving his own pair or whatever it is. You don't need him to drive his own pair. You've got maybe one of the best pairs in the entire league, if not the best. What more do you need?
Mm-hmm. I mean, and he's in all situations defenseman too. Like, he's out there in every important situation. He's their number 3 penalty killer on defense. He can play power play. He just doesn't to the extent because of Hughes. So you don't think 8 by 8?
But by the way, so like, why dick around with this? To just be blunt with my thought process. So is Quinn Hughes going to be pissed that he's making $150,000 more than him on the cap?
Right. I don't think so, knowing that he's about to be making $14 million a season in a couple of years.
Well, so that's my point. What do you like? What's 100? First off, what's $150,000? Like
absolutely nothing.
Is it the optics of you need to be King Kong on the cap that you feel like just from a pure? I've never gotten that sense from Quinn Hughes. Do you guys think that that's something that he would care about?
No, again, and this is the flex contract of Philip Hronek. Like, it's not getting any better. He's not signing another deal, Philip Hronek. And
this is
Hughes,
This is his only chance.
My version of that contract is going to be twice that contract.
Right.
I didn't look today, but I think his career earnings are $9 million. Like, this is it. This is his big boy deal. Quinn Hughes has already gotten lifetime security. The next one is going to just be, how big your house and your fourth house are and your boat are.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
So I
can't imagine him getting in the way is my point. And so if Quinn Hughes is not getting in the way, why would the Canucks stick their nose out and get it out of joint over a seemingly a rule, an arbitrary rule to make a rule?
Mm-hmm.
That's why I don't think it has any merit.
Right. So you think 8x8 gets it done then with Hronek?
I don't know, but I would seem to think so.
Okay. Am I quibbling by saying 8x7? Like, do you think the extra year means something to Alan Walsh?
I don't know. I would think that where he's at, he'd want to get the 8th year. I would want to get the 8th year. By that point, he'd be 34, like 33, 34.
Yeah, still probably pretty decent.
You're probably not pulling an 8. You're probably, the next one might look like a 4 or a 5.
Right, yeah.
So you'd probably want that 8th year to maximize your earnings, but that's how I would think.
I wonder if that's a place to save some dough if they can negotiate on that number then rather than the 8.
All right. Give our best to Torts. How's he doing these days?
Well, I don't know. Haven't seen him. Usually head coaches come out for post.
I haven't seen him.
See, I knew if I threw that out there.
I mean, honestly, like, is he only getting reinforced though by the results? They get points in both of the games that he benches Couturier. So is he only being encouraged in some ways?
Look, I don't know John Tortorella at all. I only, I've seen this act for a long time. Just knowing what I think I know about him and from other people that know him really well, it feels like benching Sean Couturier and winning, like you might as well have just hooked him up to, something. Shoot it right into his veins on Wednesday after the win.
Yeah.
Because that was to then double down.
Yeah.
I mean, so let me just, for proper context, like give you my thoughts on the Couturier part of it. I've watched this really closely. He hasn't been great, but I could think of 4 players to pull out of the lineup before him.
Right.
So, okay. So you make your statement, you win. Does anyone really think the Flyers are better with a Selke Trophy winner in their press box than on the ice? Like I think at some point you begin to lose it. The rest of the team who's sitting there going, hey, we know Sean Couturier should be in our lineup. And the point that I made on social media yesterday, which obviously no context in a tweet, people don't understand. They're like, why do you care? He's not accountable to you in the media. And I agree. That wasn't the point of my tweet. But when you have your captain say he doesn't like the way he's been treated, and when you have his agent come out and say he's been ignored, he doesn't owe me or any fan or anyone else any explanation. But when you don't give one to your captain, I just think that's shit.
Well, also, I think accountability is a two-way street. I would argue he does owe the fans an explanation.
Well,
I mean, Couturier is their captain and a guy that you go to the rink to watch. I mean, he's not a bonanza box office guy or anything like that, but to the extent that he helps the Philadelphia Flyers win hockey games, you want to see him in the lineup if you're going.
But why be a weenie and just not? I'm going to let my assistant do the press.
So let me ask you this: we saw that Flyers blog earlier in the weeks. Go back and find the receipts on John Tortorella being adamant there would not be a captain this season. So is the theory here that John Tortorella got usurped on that decision by upper management, and that so he's grieving it the only way he knows how?
In talking to Flyers sources, they had mentioned that things were going sideways at one point this year, and it was John Tortorella that came in and said, I think we should name a captain. It was, maybe 2 weeks before they ended up doing it publicly. So it was his idea. And I get the concept, like no one is safe. We could scratch anyone at any time, trade anyone at any time. That's fine. But to do it once, great. Message received. to do it again and make it seem like it feels like you're making it about you at that point.
Mm-hmm. Geez, not the first time we've thought that with John Tortorella.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, look, the line is pretty long. You've seen Brendan Dubinsky smash Tortorella on social media this week. Everyone's been waiting for a Roberto Luongo tweet. I mean, there's plenty of history to suggest that this is going to end, and probably not well for Tortorella at some point. It might not be this week or the end of this season, but this is the type of stuff that you get in your own way too much.
Well,
why can't you just, this has been an unbelievable Jack Adams type year for you. Why
exactly?
Why do this to yourself? Why self-destruct?
I was going to ask, could the guy go from Jack Adams finalist to out of a job, especially if the Flyers miss the playoffs after all this?
I think that would be a stretch, because the Flyers, he has one of the most unique seats at the table in terms of power and control in an organization right now. I would say it's Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh, Rod Brindamore in Carolina. I do think Rick Tocchet has a pretty significant amount of sway in Van. Short of that, I don't know how many people would be ahead of John Tortorella in terms of control and say. I don't think he's going anywhere. But like I said, when the players start to despise you, when stuff like this happens, the shelf life is never long.
Right. Great stuff. Thanks for this. Enjoy your weekend. Till next Friday.
See you guys.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.